Welcome to the Physician Sense Podcast, a podcast designed specifically for physicians, offering a breakdown of complex financial topics to help you develop your financial IQ, further your financial journey, and improve your well-being. Whether you're a medical student, resident, fellow, or attending physician, you're sure to learn something new that will benefit your journey. And now, your hosts, Chad Chubb and Tyler Olson.
Hey all, welcome to the Physician Sense Podcast. I'm Tyler, and my co-host Chad is with me. And we have a special guest today, Dr. Kaveh Hoda. He's a gastroenterologist, Twitter friend of mine for a few years, and a podcaster himself. So thanks a lot for joining us, Kaveh. We're going to be using you as a guinea pig today.
I am excited. I can't wait to see what you probe me with, question-wise, I mean.
All right. I love where this is headed. Our intent with this conversation is to talk with Kaveh about a variety of financial questions and decisions that many of you physicians in training and early attendings have on your minds. And instead of you having to sit in front of a financial planner and feeling like maybe you're being sold something, or maybe you don't want to be having a conversation with someone yet, but you have all these questions, that's what this episode is for. So Kaveh he's standing in the line of fire for you. And we're going to be talking about a few different things that we think are particularly relevant to you all.
To the younger listeners, what I would say is I am no longer a new attending, but I haven't learned much about finance in all the time I have been in attending. So what I'm hoping to do is help give some perspective and ask some questions that I wish I had known when I was coming out of training and when I was entering as an attending physician. So hopefully you guys have a better sense of how to start that process than I did.
I love that you're willing to talk about this. I think it'll be very helpful. If you could go back and say, I don't know, like just, pick a random year, like PGY2, PGY3, somewhere in there, were there things that you were worried about that you didn't even know like where to start?
Boy, it's a really good question, because honestly, when you're at that point, you're so immersed in your training and it's so busy that you are kind of focused on that moment. You're kind of focused on surviving your residency, your fellowship, your training process, and getting through that. You aren't planning at least I was not planning, financially ahead. I was thinking very little of it. We all kind of assume that once you become a doctor, you're going to be okay and you won't have to worry about it. Some of us go into it as that's part of the reason we like medicine, You feel like you don't have to. But that's not really true. Any profession, any job, you need to worry about, financial stuff, planning for the future. I think a lot of us, we're just there, A, trying to get through, B, maybe doing some family planning at that point. Maybe you're thinking about getting married. Maybe you're thinking about kids. And maybe some people are starting to have kids at that point. That's kind of around the time some of us started. So, that's kind of what we're thinking. But in terms of like financial decisions, we received really no background in it. Most of us went through undergrad fully focused on our studies and not really learning that much about it. There are some physicians out there who are just savvier than others about this, but I don't think it's the norm. So for me personally, I had very little background going into this. So when I did come out, the basic questions of, buying a home versus renting, what to invest in, and then starting to have kids, how do you prepare for their college? That's the stuff that I started to think about for the first time later, much later, unfortunately, not during fellowship or residency for me.
Yeah, and those are they're really important to many of us. If we're like, I'd like to own a home, I'd like to be a homeowner. Not just from this is important to me just because, but also because we often hear that home ownership is a good long-term investment, that
right.
People that own their homes, they have greater stability later on in life, not having to pay rent, for example, and eventually the mortgage being gone. How do you figure out when is the right time and what is the approach to it? Then the other one about kids and saving for college, equally yeah, nebulous. So let's address those two. If you were coming out of training at that point and you were to talk to me or Chad, I know one of the first things that I would say, contrast as you wish, Chad, but for me, one of the first things I would say is don't hastily buy a home, because so many doctors do not stick with their first attending job. Does that resonate with your own experience? Like, or not necessarily just yours, but even like people around you? Did you see that there is that turnover?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we all come out hoping that it's, you get your dream job, and some people are lucky enough to get a job they love straight out. But you're exactly right. Even in those situations, I see a lot of people, myself included, switching to different positions or to different places. I've stayed essentially in the same area, but I myself have also switched hospitals I've worked at. So that's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I think part of the problem with doctors is that we see so many of our friends start to build careers, especially before. Now, I think it's maybe a little different, but before, when we were in med school, a lot of our friends are already building successful careers, going out there and making money while we were still in our training process. And there is this fear for some people of catching up. Now, I think it's a little different now because the housing market's so much more difficult. And, there's so much in terms of loans that people have to worry about. But I think that's still probably true to some degree for all medical trainees, is this fear of being behind in some sense when it comes to when you're finished.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
I'm going to jump in with one question. I have two questions. Kaveh, for the first one, just going back to your training, because this is always just an interesting question I have whenever we talk to physicians. Did you have anyone ever come in, residency or fellowship, to do anything like financial literacy based, financial education? And I'd even include disability insurance, maybe more of a sales pitch, but still educational. Anything like that you can recall, residency or fellowship?
Yeah, let's see. Definitely not in fellowship. There were some predatory sort of like services always around that saw future earnings from physicians that were around, but nothing in terms of an organized training that occurred. And maybe the only time I actually remember was in medical school, and that was maybe just like one day. So very, very little in terms of preparation.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And then kind of building on the house topic, you don't have to give me all the personal details, but probing you, when did you eventually buy your first home out of training, done with fellowship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It was about 3 to 4 years. 3 years. Yeah, 3 years out. So Tyler, does that seem reasonable to you? 3 years, is that enough time to build up enough income as a physician to buy a house? Is that a good timing?
I do believe that that's a good target. 3 to 4 years is a good amount of time to ascertain whether someone really likes their job and likes the location. And it also gives you a lot of time to be able to pay off credit card debt, any private student loans, and get yourself in a routine of saving for retirement through your employer's 403b or 401k, perhaps through a backdoor Roth. And, if you have other savings accounts too. Anyone that waits that long, I think, has been very disciplined, because you're all, many of you are waiting so many years already. I know that even waiting 1 year is challenging for a lot of doctors who are out of training. And, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, like we're moving to our hometown, our entire family's here, I know that I love it, I already know, the practice owners. There are some scenarios like that where they want to buy a home right away, and that's fine. That makes sense. But for the majority, I encourage them to be patient, and waiting 1 year is a bit of a challenge. So if they can wait 3 or 4 years where they really are digging into I like this place, I'm saving, I'm investing, I think that's a really solid start.
I think that's also good for people in training to remember that a lot of the places they're going to start working at have a partnership process. And that usually takes a couple of years. And unfortunately, some places you will be there for a couple of years before you realize that the partnership may not work out. maybe it will take longer than you were hoping, or you realize you don't want to be a partner there. So I do think it's probably a good idea, like you said, to not buy immediately, just from the perspective of the job may not be the one you want.
Let's say there wasn't a partnership track, but even like, an academic role, that can be like a contract renewal is always around like 2 or 3 years too. So it even gives you like a full cycle in that first contract to be like, okay, I can stand these people. I don't, dread going into work every day.
Yeah.
As you both noted, it's hard. There's a little bit of like, I waited this long, now I want to start. I always come back to either first generation or second generation, like international, where when you're born and raised in the States, you kind of know what's going on, but so many others kind of come in and like owning a home is the US dream. Like this is what is embedded.
Yeah, right.
And I feel like others come in and they think like, that's it. Like you have to buy the home, you have to own the home. And I think there's a lot of reasons, especially early on in this transition phase where renting can make a lot of sense. And even plug in all the craziness of the current housing market, whether it's prices or rates, like I think it even adds just a little bit of buffer in there to say, like, take a deep breath, make sure you love everything, make sure, you're going to be here longer than 3 weeks, and then, take that next big step. Because out of all the purchases in your life, this is the largest for most by far. I mean, maybe you make some crazy money at a cool yacht someday, but for most of us, like this is our largest purchase by far.
Something that I think some of us worried about coming out, not buying a home is, and again, we know so little, but we hear things like, if you have money and you're not doing anything with it, it's kind of just wasting. You should be growing it in some way or shape or form. So for people who are like, okay, well, if I'm not putting it immediately into an investment in a home, what should I be doing with it to grow it? Is it okay to just sit on the money for a little bit, for a couple years, and not invested in things, and to not do something with it? And if you do something with it, like kind of what are the ranges of safe things to do with it to not so safe things to do with it that might make more?
I actually just posted about this, I think it was yesterday, even. By the time this comes out, it'll be a couple of months in the past. But in mid-July, I posted about an experience with a doctor that I know. He left about $250,000 in his checking account over the past 4 years. It's gradually increased. He's just been saving it, like he's just stockpiling. And he asked me to post it because he's like, this is like, he realized that it wasn't the wisest thing to do. Now, there could have been worse things. Somebody was like, well, at least he didn't buy a Lamborghini or something.
Yeah, right.
But he was like, I'd like to share this cautionary tale because the cost of money, or I should say the value of money, goes down over time, and we need to keep up, especially these days, because the cost of expenses, the cost of living expenses is going up. So sitting in a checking account that's earning nothing, you're effectively guaranteed that you're losing value on your dollars. So you don't have to do anything really, really fancy. There's a lot of marketing toward doctors that they need to do something that's going to help them to achieve financial freedom and that will give them passive income, particularly in the realm of real estate. And you either really need to have an interest in real estate business and learning about it, or you need to wait a long time to let other types of investments and savings take place. So early career attendings should not be thinking like that they need to jump into anything that's complex. Simple. Save 3 months worth of living expenses into a separate savings account. A high yield savings account like Ally Bank is a great option. You can also open up a taxable brokerage account at a platform like Fidelity, and it automatically will go into the government money market fund, which is also considered a safe place for money, given how the Federal Reserve has historically protected the money markets, even in like the 2008 crash. Putting 3 months of living expenses in there is like a great option, no questions asked, as you're building up savings. But then after that, that's where it gets a little bit more like, okay, like what do I do? You got to organize it into long-term, mid-term, and short-term goals. Short-term goals that are less, like 4 years or less, same thing, high yield savings account or money market. Things that are longer than that are like related to education costs, like for kids, like you mentioned earlier, you might consider a 529 plan, which is a college savings plan with some tax benefits. other midterm goals that are like 5 to 10 to 15 years long, or 15 years away, you could look at a taxable brokerage account and invest the money. That would not be safe. That would be at-risk money. But done the right way, you can put yourself in a position to grow your money. And then the long term, which is actually another one of the easier ones to figure out, is to use the tax favored retirement plans that your employer offers. 403B or 401k, 457B, deferred compensation plan for like larger institutions, other types of tax favored accounts, pensions. Find out what your employer offers and get your money going in there automatically from your paycheck.
You mentioned 529 plans, and that's something that that I've thought about in the past, that we've done some stuff with myself in terms of college preparation. I have also heard for those that there is some, and again, I apologize in advance to all your like much more financially savvy listeners who have to listen to me ask these basic rudimentary questions. But the 529 plan, I've heard that there's differences between different ones depending on the state that they come from, like Ohio versus Utah versus California, etc. Is there any truth to that, and why is that?
Every state has its own plan. I couldn't tell you exactly why some are so much stronger than others. For example, like Utah is a really good plan. Utah, it's one of the 3 gold plans, I think like 10 years running or something crazy like that. But some states offer, the biggest thing for us is always, does your state offer a tax benefit? And I always make the joke, I'm like, the states with the highest tax rates, plug in California here, for whatever reason, they don't offer any tax benefits. So like most of our clients in California, we actually will look to Utah because the overall platform's a little bit nicer. The internal fees are usually lower. I will say 529 plans, similar to 401k plans, have got much more competitive over the past 4 years, where few years, I should say, where now the internal expenses are much lower or much more on par with each other. But still, Utah looks really good. And then there's some states, we're just looking at a plan for a client in New Jersey, where New Jersey doesn't have any tax benefits, but oddly enough, New Jersey only gives better asset protection if it's in New Jersey's 529 plan. So like the nerdiness of how they all work and play is important. And then, physicians is a group that not complete nomads, but there's a good amount of movement, especially in those early years. Right. So all of a sudden you're in California, but the next day you're in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Florida, and you kind of got to reevaluate where that's at. So at least from my side, and Tyler, you can chime in too, usually we're looking at, first, are there tax benefits? 2, is there anything asset protection that's unique to that state? New Jersey is probably one of the few unique ones like that. And then 3, internal fees as well, right? Let's make sure that that's low cost. But a lot of times we'll end up getting back to Utah for a lot of clients if their state doesn't have specific benefit to that state.
Yeah, I heard of that about Utah, and I just had a hard time believing it. But there you go. Utah better than California, at least in this one aspect. Sorry, Utah.
The Dr. Dahlia effect. He just went and yelled at everybody in Utah, and they built this really good 529 plan. I just made all that up, but it just sounds
good.
Right.
Yeah, I believe it. It's got a truth quality.
One thing to look out for in the realm of 529 plans is the propensity to be put into the Virginia 529 plan. Like, it's not like a really bad 529 plan. It just may be a 529 plan that many people find themselves in, and they are not really sure why, because they don't live in Virginia. And it's because it is an advisor sold 529 plan. In many cases, there are some firms that, and they're not doing anything wrong. It's just that when you go about the process of deciding, hey, I'd like to save some money for my kid's college.
Yeah, right.
You just want to make sure that, like, if you are working with a person who calls themselves a financial advisor, you want to make sure that you ask questions like, are there state income tax benefits for my state? What are they?
Yeah.
Maybe there are none, like with California. So like you might be in the Utah plan or wherever, but I've met many doctors who come to us and they say, oh yeah, I've got a 529 plan. It's, it's Virginia. Oh, it's like, oh, did you used to live in Virginia? No. And it's because there's a relationship between that plan and a fund company that sells commission-based mutual funds.
Yeah.
And that's how they compensate advisors to function as their customer service reps. So, but whether or not that necessarily is the best advice and place for a given doctor's money for their kids' college, that's not certain. And so you just want to, for those of you listening, if you're going to, you just want to like ask, why this plan?
Right. Yeah.
That way you understand.
And every state technically has a broker sold option. It's not just Virginia. Virginia just has a lot. And
I got no hate for Virginia, but
and if you're sitting there in Virginia, you're like, oh my gosh, there's only one bad one. No, Virginia also has a direct one that you can go buy on your own. And we've only ever done that route that I kind of forget about the broker option. But in defense of advisors selling them, it's also the last account out there that does not have a fee only option. Like you can't set up a 529 plan and just put like a traditional AUM fee on it. Yeah. It's just whatever it is. It's like kind of being held hostage that it is always going to be brokerage sold. So no matter what state you live in, usually they all have one option that's broker sold and then one that's direct, where you just go to like mystates529plan.com and you can sign up online within a few minutes. It doesn't send you to an advisor or anything like that. So in defense of Virginia, there's two plans in there, but it is common to see the broker one more often than not for whatever reason. They must. And the reason why this can be bad is a lot of these have sales loads on them. So like if you go put $100 into your kids' 529 plan, a lot of them will take 5.75% or 5.7% right off the top in the form of a commission. So not the $100 goes into that. I'm not good at math, but take out 5.75% or whatever it is around there. And that's what's getting invested. But, do that over and over and over again. And that's why if you can avoid that in 529 plans, like you're not in there like active trading. You're not like, oh my gosh, NVIDIA's up today. Like get in the 529 plan. Like you're going to set a formula in there, an allocation, and you're likely not tinkering with it for like long periods of time, similar to like retirement. We got 18 years to our kids go to college. So it's an important account. It's one to take advantage of. But, as Tyler noted there too, like you got to also know what's going on. It's not every 529 plan is not created equally.
Hey, Chad, do you realize that you just said that you're not good at math? I think that we should use that as one of our teaser trailers.
Oh, I always say that. Yeah, that's like one of my favorite lines. I tell people that all the time. They're just like, wait. I'm like, yeah.
No, you have calculators everywhere. That sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
You don't.
Yeah. You invent the internet. Like, I'm also a doctor on the side. I have WebMD. I don't. It's easy these days.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I think that most young professionals coming out now, they have options to go to like managed care systems, like a Kaiser, where a lot of the stuff is taken care of for you with minimal interaction from you, and or to an academic center where it's a similar process to some degree, but for like those that are thinking about maybe starting a practice or joining a small practice, there's, I think, so many questions that they must have. And that's a very difficult time, because again, this is one of those things where I feel like you just have to learn on the job. But in terms of some basic questions I have, like, what is an S Corp? What is an LLC? What is the difference? And what is the benefit of one versus the other for someone who's starting a private practice? Again, taking out of the picture all the questions about like what competing hospitals are there, with the practice, how busy it'll be, etc. Just looking at those basic questions, how would you guys address that?
I think of two paths here. Like generally, there's a lot of ways to go about it, but if the first one that comes to my mind is really common, it's extremely common in emergency medicine, is Locum Tenens roles, like where they're just like everything is, they're a subcontractor and the hospital that they work at, it's their employer, but it's not their like actual employer where that they get taxes withheld. And so they receive 1099 income, and it's beneficial for doctors who are in that situation. And this isn't just emergency medicine docs. It could be any specialty really, but is to form an LLC, or in some states, like for example, California requires physicians to establish a professional corporation. You can't have an LLC as a doctor doing the services of a doctor. You need to find out what your state requires as far as like physician services. So whether it's a professional corporation or an LLC, form that through your state Secretary of State or DMV, whichever their, Department of Revenue process is. And you get that LLC or PC set up. And then when you apply, you get what's called Articles of Organization. It's a document that the state will email you or they'll mail to you. And then you can use that document to say like, hey, I've got Kaveh Hoda LLC or PC is my corporation. And then you can go to irs.gov and you can apply for an employer identification number. Now, you don't have to do this. You can use your own social security number. I think that from an asset protection standpoint and like a true demarcation of personal risk from professional risk, it's good to get the EIN. You can then go to a bank like Chase, Bank of America, Ally, wherever, and you can open up a business checking account with that EIN. You can apply for a business credit card with that EIN, that employer identification number. It makes it so much easier to separate business revenue or income from personal income and business expenses versus personal expenses. Because if you're going down this route and it's going to be something that's sustained, parsing out personal expenses from business expenses from your Chase Freedom card is a pain. Having this sort of infrastructure and organization at the outset is really helpful to making sure that you're maximizing the benefits of this self-employment. Being able to fund a solo 401k, for example. That's a way to be able to, even if you don't have an employer with a 401k, you can make your own. And you can do $23,000 per year plus 20% of that 1099 net income into your own solo 401k. And you can even do even more than that if you work with certain platforms. Like, I know Merrill Lynch does this because we're doing that right now with Merrill Lynch, ironically. But also like Fidelity and other platforms, you could set it up to where you could do after-tax dollars and do what's called the mega backdoor Roth. There's a lot that can be done in terms of retirement savings under this setting, but you have to get organized at the outset. Otherwise, it's harder to do it later on. So that's the first one.
Will both an S Corp and an LLC allow you to do that?
You have to open up the LLC or PLLC first. There's no such thing as an S Corp per se, right? An S Corp is actually just a tax filing. So once you have your LLC, you would then file a form with the IRS that says, hey, I want to file as an S Corp for this given year. And then that's when you're an S Corp. And then if you wanted to dissolve that, you could do that down the road. But another common misconception that they think it's two separate entities, but the S Corp is actually more or less just like an overlay to the LLC.
I absolutely thought that. So I'm glad you're clarifying that.
Yeah.
It's like a specialization, like going from an internal medicine doctor to being a gastroenterologist. Okay. You put it in terms that a simpleton like myself can understand. I appreciate this.
Yes,
Go on.
I love it. That was perfect.
Like another way of putting it is an LLC or a PLLC is an entity. S Corp is a decision that one would make about their PLLC or LLC. On the note of S Corp election, be cautious and slow about electing this. Man, you should see some of the. If you've ever been on tax Twitter, Kaveh?
I have not been on tax Twitter.
I imagine not. But if you ever went over there and saw them talking about the situations they run into with people that have elected S Corp status, they're ticked off a lot of times because it's such a mess. And they're not ticked off at the people that do it. They're ticked off at the way in which social media marketing is trying to get people to do it. Like the person promoting it, they're just trying to get engagement, but they don't really know what they're talking about. And they don't know how to effectively communicate or educate their audience. And so you got a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, elect S Corp status. I've got people that come to me and they say, hey, yeah, I already did it. I elected S Corp status. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm glad you did that. Like, it's like, all right, like hopefully that was the right move, because you need to have the right ratio of income that's going to be flowing through this entity for it to really make sense. It's not to say that you're going to be like, it's not like a disaster. It's just, it could be a real pain for a long time, from like paying accountants to like do the paperwork for you when you really could have avoided it by not doing it altogether. So if you are someone who's thinking, should I do this? Should I elect S Corp status? I would say talk to a tax professional who will educate you on the pros and cons of if and when to do it. Don't just do it on a whim.
If someone did that and they decided it's not for them, how do they get out of that? Like, do they have to wait a year and the next year file differently, as choosing to not be an S Corp? How could they get out of it if they're in that?
I need to think. I don't have that at the top of my head about the unraveling process. I know there is one, but I don't know right off the top of my head. Do you, Chad?
Don't quote me on it, but only from working with our accountant, we got this set up a few years ago. I think it's relatively simple. I say simple. An accountant might say it's not, to dissolve it after. But I believe it is like a year to year. I don't know if you can. Actually, I think you can just turn it off. You essentially send a letter into the IRS. They confirm it. So I don't think it's that difficult. It's probably more steps to get it set up appropriately than it is to actually turn it off. But it's not like one of those, like, there's not like crazy fees or anything to get out of it. It's more or less, from what I remember and believe, it's like a letter to the IRS that says, hey, we're good, we're done here. And then you move on.
Okay.
I would say part of the complexity will depend on the type and level of activity that the business was involved in leading up to this. Like, for example, I would expect that if any sort of retirement plans that are complex, like cash balance plans, were added under the arrangement of an S Corp election, that it might take some additional steps. The main point here is just it can be unraveled, but just seek professional advice. If you're in the situation, there's a way out. You just got to get the right people around you. And if you're thinking about doing it, don't do it on your own. Like, get help to ascertain how to do it.
The Google Cliff Notes it's a form 966, so 966. And pretty much you submit that within 30 days of your vote to say that you're shutting it down. And then when you submit that last tax return, you just mark final on it. I'm sure there's more steps in that.
Sure.
Use that as Google Cliff Notes. Seems like a relatively good source. And to Tyler's point, it's the difference. Like, if you set it up on accident, you're like, oh, sugar, I got to get out of this thing. Like, it's probably a lot easier to shut it down. But if you've been doing it for years and there's bank accounts and retirement accounts, it does get a lot more hairy in terms of like, okay, doing this properly, this funds need to go here. There are going to be a lot more moving parts for sure.
I was hoping you guys would just be impressed that I knew what an S Corp was.
I am impressed.
We are very proud of you. We are.
Thank you.
We are.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because that's a big step for me.
Yeah. No, we're patting you on the back, sir.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Another aspect, like the other path, as far as like opening up one's own practice, would be not just like being the, independent physician that like will work here and there at different jobs and, just earn 1099 income, but to actually start a practice. A lot of doctors ask about this, and it feels like a very, very uphill battle, given the direction that healthcare has moved. Anyone that that like has questions about this, like there are several doctors that I know, like personally and on social media, that openly talk about, hey, this is how you get it set up in a variety of specialties. And in every specialty, I've met doctors who are like, yes, no, there is a way to do it. Does anyone want to learn? I'll teach you. I'll show you how to do it. So your colleagues, there are colleagues in every specialty that love private practice and they want other doctors to know how to do it. So you have that kind of support.
You guys work primarily with physicians, right? Both of you, or at least a good portion of your practice is with physicians. Do you, in the time you've been doing it, have you noted that doctors are shifting more to locums work? Because when I was in training, locums was rare. Not many of us thought about it, planned to do it. I feel like now for a lot of people, it seems like a good option. They work for a couple of weeks here or there. They'll knock out a busy couple of weeks, make a good amount of money, have a couple of weeks off. Are you guys noticing a change in that? And how do you feel like those people are faring financially compared to more traditional doctors who have like a regular practice that they've built over years?
We have a few locum tenens physicians. We've had one recently that kind of left a larger practice, couldn't find much else out there, and now they're doing locum tenens work, and they seem to be enjoying it. To your question, I feel like we've had a lot more decently established, 5 to 10 years as an attending. More and more of them have started to add another form of income.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's for freedom, whether that's for extra savings, whether that's for like just in case. I've noticed that uptick over the past few years. Now, I don't know how much of this was also from COVID, right? Like the
Right.
amount of radiologists that we work with that work from their home all day and have supercomputers in their house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the bulk of our radiologists are actually at home and they work at practices across the country or further away. Psychiatry is another good one. And so I can't tell if it's just a pivot in medicine or if it's a pivot just with technology making things a lot easier. But I have noticed with our client base and even just conversations we have with other physicians that we have seen an uptick in more independent contractor status, whether that's full locums or just kind of adding some extra income and ideally building that up over time.
I mean, as far as like clients that we work with, I've seen a modest increase. What I've seen a lot of, though, is a lot of like non-clients that ask questions on social media. Like when we go to teach at training programs, fellowships, and residencies, they get a lot more questions in that realm because I think that they're looking at their options and they see it as like, oh, this is something that I could do. I've also gotten a lot of, I don't know about you, Chad, I've gotten a lot of communication from recruiters that are like trying to like get in front of more doctors to offer locums jobs. So I think that there is more activity. There is more activity and interest in trying to like plug people in different places. And I don't think that it's a bad situation to be in. I think that the doctor needs to be that much more educated to educate themselves on how to navigate this. Like what we were just spelling out about like the LLC and the EIN and the solo 401k. Like if they do that because they've learned about it, it can be a great baseline retirement savings plan. And they can have the flexibility that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But if they don't know about this, there's the alternative. Like the other end of the spectrum is a doctor that gets to February 1st and he gets a 1099 with $250,000 in income and he didn't save any for taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like, oh, that is a terrible feeling and impact. So it's not a bad thing. It's just the requirement to know what you're getting into is much higher.
Yeah, locum tenens, anything 1099. If you had to take one thing away from it, like you're a business owner, you need to come in and know like you're not just making the cupcakes anymore. You need to make sure the supplies are good, the shop's open on time, the floor is clean. Like it's not just like, hey, I'm here just to be a physician.
Right.
Like there's a lot of other moving parts that come with it.
Right.
And I love it. Being business owners, naturally, we're going to have an appeal to that side. I think there's so much that comes with it. But at the same time, you need to be prepared for those moving parts that come with it. And it gives you a lot more control, but you got to be ready for it. You got to give it the TLC that it deserves. I love our physicians that are either locum tenens or have some type of 1099 income. It opens like a whole new universe in terms of tax planning and financial planning, but it also comes with, a few extra hats you got to put on as well.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see, Kaveh, we could go on and on until you passed out, right?
Never. Bring it on. Try me. No, I appreciate your time so much. This is really, for me, I hope your listeners got something from it too. But for me, I got a lot from this. So I really appreciate it.
Looks like you're taking notes too.
I do. I am. I always take notes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good habit.
And some just doodling as well.
We're going to have some shows and notes. It's just going to be like a picture of like some type of animal or something.
No, I can't show you guys. This is a family show.
Yeah. Speaking of non-family shows,
you can listen to my show with your family. Usually, sometimes.
Yeah. No, my 5-year-old, he repeats everything that you say.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
We didn't mention this yet, but Kaveh's got. I mentioned that he has a podcast, but the podcast is called House of Pod. It's basically a humor adjacent medical podcast.
You've been on it, Tyler. You've been on it. You were a guest on my show. Yeah,
that's right. And we've got more to talk about, I hope.
I'll have to have you guys both on to. We have a lot more to talk about. We'll have you guys on to talk about this in a little more detail. I have more questions for you guys. I'll save it for my show.
If you haven't subscribed to Kaveh's podcast, House of Pod, you should. It is informative and just the right amount of comic relief. So
Yeah, thanks. I try. Yeah, I mean, it's hard with some of the topics we cover, but we certainly try. So, yeah, thank you guys both so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, Kaveh. Appreciate it.
This information is for general purposes only. This information is not intended to be a substitute for specific professional, financial, or tax advice, as individual concerns vary. Please see a financial professional, CPA, and/or an attorney in regards to your own individual situation. Wealth Heals Advisory Services and Financial Planning offered through Vicus Capital Inc., a federally registered investment advisor. Olson Consulting LLC, offering advisory services and financial planning, is a state registered investment advisor.